was younger, I did an awful lot of coaching, mostly basketball. And one of the things you learn when you coach is you don't know much about your team until things start going poorly. You don't know much about your team when the balls are all in the basket and the girls are all cheering and you're logging win after win. You find out about your team when you feel like you got cheated by the ref, or when your star sprains an ankle, when you lose several games in a row, when you choke. How do you respond to the difficult circumstances of life? That's what's revelatory. That's when you find out what you got. One thing for sure in this story we just heard is that everybody is under stress. Everybody's having a rough time. There's excitement in the air, there's danger, there's uncertainty. Everybody's going through a difficult time. The theme that holds this story together is that we have two pictures of how do you respond to difficult times. We have Jesus, who is called by the mystics the true self, and how does he respond? And then we have the false self, represented by the crowds, the disciples, and the authorities. How do they respond to stress? Let me weave this together for us tonight in order to ask the question. This story is not a one-time historic event. It's a story that's happening every day. It's a story asking the question, what energy are we going to act from in the difficult circumstances of life? Let's start with the false self. For you regulars, we've used this term before, which the false self is that part of us that is made up largely of our ego, our traumas that we carry, throw in a shadow or two, a few bad memories, and this is the container in which we present to the world. This is who we present ourselves to be in order to get through life. The container can change many times in life. We see it in the news all the time. Somebody who has got this incredible container, something terrible happens, Tiger Woods gets in another car accident, and the container is tarnished. In the story, the crowd is a perfect example of the false self. The false self is this container doesn't have deep roots. It's not connected eternally, so it is fickle. On Wednesday, they want to make Jesus king. On Friday, they want to kill him. How fickle can one be? How ungrounded, how unconnected to reality, how unaware of what's even going on in oneself to be that fickle. The false self is capable of betrayal under stress. We're not exactly sure why Judas betrayed. It's a mystery to some extent what his agenda was. But under stress, the false self can certainly betray. Under stress, the false self could be like the disciples when Jesus was asking for them to simply stay awake. When Jesus was vulnerable and asking for them to be there for him, the false self falls asleep. The false self is afraid of even being around and wants to avoid what's going on. When violence comes to the door to arrest Jesus, the false self can be fight or flight. A minute ago, it was flight, right? They fell asleep. Then they represent fighting. I'm going to grab a sword and I'm going to hit the slave of the chief priest. How ridiculous! What are you trying to accomplish? Where's your groundedness? Where's your strategy? What's the thought? No. Under stress, we do crazy things. Under stress, we deny our friends. We're afraid for ourselves. You don't have to read too much of the paper these days to see people denying their friends because they're afraid, right? Things that they believed before, they don't believe anymore because that isn't the recipe that's currently being cooked in Washington. The authorities were under stress. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't want a rebellion. They didn't want a massacre. So they create stories. They create lies. They don't tell the truth. They fabricate things. The false self can be very, very active in very, very all these ways when it's under stress. The true self is anchored in a different way. Jesus knows who he is. He heard from the heavens, "You are my beloved Son." Jesus is anchored. Jesus is grounded. Jesus under stress shows us a different way. And I love this because through most of the gospel narratives, Jesus is sort of a star. I mean, he's saying great things. He's doing great things. We're watching him act in a way that most of us aren't going to be acting, healing the sick, etc. But here, under these pages we just read, he doesn't do much of anything. He doesn't give great speeches. He doesn't throw around beautiful parables. Except for the guy with the ear, he doesn't really heal anybody. He is just he's walking through horrific, difficult circumstances, and we just get to watch how God does that. Isn't that amazing? We get to see how somebody who's the true self, who's eternally connected, responds to these horrific circumstances. And when the crowd wants to make him king, he's not moved. You can't move somebody who's grounded. He doesn't buy into it, say, "Hey, why not? This sounds cool." No, he knows that's not what this is about. He's not moved. In a sense, he makes fun of it with this donkey thing he was doing. When Judas betrays him, he doesn't out him. He's not violent. He doesn't shame him. He doesn't return violence with violence. When he's abandoned by his friends who sleep through his most vulnerable hour, he's hurt. But he doesn't shame them. There's no violent speech. He doesn't hurt them with his words. He's grounded. When Peter denies him, he doesn't seek him out and ruin his life forever. I don't know if it's this text or another one. It says he does look at him. And we've always wondered what that look was like. I vote it was compassion of a grounded person, right? When they're telling lies about him in court, he doesn't respond violently. He doesn't project out. He just tells the truth as he knows it. There's a dignity, a connectedness in all of this. Ultimately, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." In another text, he says he has enough compassion for somebody who's dying next to him. It's this view of the true self that makes the shoulder exclaim, "Truly, this is the Son of God." This is not a story in history that we just get to watch. This is a story we get to live. The true self is within us, as is the false self, which we need to get to know, but the true self is within us. The good news is that this way of behaving is possible for us. My stepson is reading the Diary of Anne Frank, which I'm sure people have read or heard of. Story of a Jewish teenager during Nazi-occupied the Netherlands, living in an attic for 2 years, every day afraid of losing their life, being taken away. And in her diary, She never loses the sight of who she is. She never loses the sight of the essential goodness in everyone, even the Nazis. In a sense, she's saying in her diary, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They're nuts. They don't know how great they are. This is a teenage girl accessing this part of herself that she's been given, the hardware at birth, the true self. Recently, we've had exposure to what's been going on up in Minneapolis, reading the headlines of people acting out, bad behavior, overreaching authorities, et cetera, et cetera. What we're starting to hear more and more, but every act of violence, every act that was wrong and unfair and over the top, we had 100 acts of compassion. 100 people going around with phones and with whistles and with other things, trying to protect their neighbors, alert them. It's 20 degrees below zero up there at the time, and people are running around getting food to people who are shut in because they're afraid to go out. Hundreds and thousands of people being neighborly one to another, some losing their life for it, others being threatened with criminal activity themselves as somehow obstructing justice. It's an incredible act of people under difficult circumstances of life finding this place within themselves that they were given, the true self, and acting on it courageously. Little old ladies, bringing food 20 degrees below zero to a neighbor who can't go outside for afraid of being arrested. So tonight we celebrate the Passion, both as a historic event, something that happened, but also something that is happening. Every time we access the true self in the circumstances of life in which we find ourselves, we're making the Passion alive again. We are bringing forth the salvation that Jesus came to bring us. Amen.
Amen.